What if the true battle for power in ancient Rome never happened on the battlefield, but in shadowed corridors where whispers cut deeper than swords? Imagine standing inside a world where a single rumor could destroy a dynasty, where every smile might hide a hidden blade, and where political rivals vanished not because of open rebellion, but because an emperor decided their existence was no longer convenient. This was the real stage of Roman power, a realm not of marble statues and heroic speeches, but of fear, suspicion, and cruelty, so calculated that even later emperors hesitated before repeating it. To understand the brutality of these rulers, you need to forget the polished image left in many chronicles. Behind the imperial facade was a system built on paranoia, ambition, and a hunger for absolute control. The Roman emperors did not simply govern, they hunted anyone who even appeared capable of challenging them. Some rivals were eliminated through swift public executions, meant to shock the masses. Others were erased through subtle schemes hidden behind palace walls, where poison, forged accusations, and staged conspiracies became everyday tools of survival. And yet, the most disturbing part was not just how these emperors acted, but how normal this behavior became inside the political machinery of Rome. Senadores learned to speak carefully, generals learned to bow deeper, and even family members understood that loyalty meant very little when a crown was at stake. In this world, cruelty was not only expected, it was rewarded. If you rose to power, you maintained it by ensuring your enemies never had the chance to breathe long enough to strike. If you hesitated, the empire devoured you next. You may wonder how people endured such a system. Maybe you have already felt something similar on a smaller scale, when someone used influence, fear, or manipulation to silence you or someone you know. You ever lived a moment when power turned into intimidation? That is why exploring these ancient stories matters. They reveal patterns of domination that repeat across centuries, shaping the political landscape and exposing how far individuals will go to protect their authority. If this beginning resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me if you have ever faced a situation where power felt oppressive, or if this glimpse into the hidden cruelty of Roman politics surprised you. And before we continue, make sure you like this video and check if you are already subscribed to the channel, because the next layers of this story will take us even deeper into a world where political survival meant eliminating rivals before they even realized they were in danger. Let us move forward into the heart of Rome's darkest power struggles, where every decision could determine who lived, who died, and who disappeared without a trace. The political atmosphere of Rome did not calm once an emperor secured the throne. In many ways, that was only when the real danger began. Inside the Senate, beneath the polished marble floors and grand debates, a second arena existed, one ruled by ambition, alliances, and quiet betrayal. Senators who publicly praised the emperor often whispered alternative futures behind closed doors, imagining scenarios where someone else might sit on the throne, someone they could influence or control more easily. These private conversations were not simple disagreements about policy. They were seeds of conspiracies that could reshape the empire if nurtured carefully enough. Rival factions formed naturally, each built on networks of favors, shared secrets, and mutual survival. A senator who rose too quickly attracted suspicion, while one who remained too quiet risked being overlooked or accused of plotting. In this environment, personal advancement depended on maintaining the illusion of loyalty while quietly aligning with powerful families or military leaders who could shift the balance of power in a single night. Every gesture mattered. A handshake could signal support, a missed meeting could imply betrayal, and a single phrase uttered at a feast might be enough to start a chain of rumors that traveled farther than any messenger. Inside these political currents, emperors themselves often became prisoners of the very institutions that were meant to advise them. They knew that the men seated before them in elegant robes were not passive administrators, but players in a dangerous game of influence. Some emperors tried to buy loyalty with wealth and positions, hoping gold could muffle dissent. Others chose intimidation, believing fear would seal the cracks forming beneath their rule. Yet both methods carried risks. Too much generosity created rivals who felt empowered. Too much cruelty forged underground alliances between those who feared they might be the next target. The Senate chambers, celebrated in Roman tradition as symbols of reason and civility, were frequently breeding grounds for plots wrapped in rhetoric. A speech about stability might conceal a coded threat. A proposal for new laws might mask an attempt to undermine imperial power. Even silence carried meaning. A senator who refused to speak at a crucial moment might be signaling disapproval or, worse, involvement in a conspiracy waiting for the right moment to surface. What made these tensions even more dangerous was the constant uncertainty. Few men knew who could truly be trusted. A childhood friend might be persuaded to switch sides. A relative might discover that political opportunity meant more than family ties. The line between ally and opponent blurred until no one could be sure where loyalty ended and ambition began. And all the while, the emperor watched, listened and analyzed, trying to determine whether the Senate remained a collection of advisors or had quietly transformed into a circle of potential executioners. Beneath the surface of polite speeches and ceremonial processions, a silent war unfolded. It was a battle fought with information instead of armies, with persuasion instead of swords, and with strategic patience rather than open defiance. But make no mistake, its consequences were just as deadly. Many emperors survived their military enemies only to fall victim to political ones, undone not by foreign invaders, but by the very men who claimed to uphold the dignity and stability of Rome. And as these hidden conflicts intensified, the empire found itself shaped not by public decrees, but by decisions made in secret rooms where truth mattered far less than power. Paranoia was not simply a trait among Roman emperors. It became a governing strategy, a shield against the quiet storms brewing inside the empire's most prestigious halls. Once an emperor sensed even the faintest shift in loyalty, the instinct to strike first often overshadowed reason. Power created isolation, and isolation bred suspicion. Every gesture from a senator, every delay from a general, every rumor whispered inside the palace fueled an emotional landscape where caution transformed into obsession. Many rulers convinced themselves that danger lurked behind every curtain, and in Rome, such fears were rarely unfounded. This atmosphere produced a devastating cycle. The more suspicious an emperor became, the more aggressively he acted against those he believed were potential threats. And the more aggressively he acted, the more genuine threats emerged, because men targeted by imperial suspicion often had no choice but to seek allies, plot escape, or consider rebellion. It was a system where fear pushed even loyal subjects into dangerous territory, creating the very conspiracies emperors believed they were preventing. Within this volatile environment, surveillance became a fine-tuned weapon. Informants infiltrated homes, banquets, and political gatherings, acting as unseen extensions of imperial eyes and ears. Slaves, servants, and guards became valuable tools, bribed or threatened into revealing the private thoughts of their masters. Some emperors developed extensive networks of intelligence, recording the movements and correspondences of influential figures across the empire. Letters were intercepted, conversations reconstructed, and personal relationships scrutinized for signs of disloyalty. A simple change in tone could be interpreted as evidence of treason. Paranoia seeped into the routines of daily life in the imperial court, Meals were tested for poison, trusted advisors were rotated frequently to prevent alliances, and private chambers were inspected for hidden passageways. Some emperors slept in different rooms each night, believing unpredictability was the only protection against nighttime assassins. Others banned weapons even from ceremonial events, fearing that a dagger disguised as a decorative piece could end their reign in seconds. The palace, despite its beauty, became a fortress built on fear rather than stability. But the most chilling consequence of this mindset was the use of preemptive punishment. If an emperor believed someone might become a threat in the future, that possibility alone justified their removal. Men were executed for imagined conspiracies, exiled for unproven suspicions, or forced to confess crimes invented by the regime. Families were destroyed not because of what they had done, but because of what they could do if given the chance. Innocence carried no weight. Survival depended on appearing harmless, obedient, and indispensable. This psychological warfare spread far beyond the palace. Military commanders stationed across the empire felt the emperor's gaze even from miles away. Any victory that brought them too much admiration could be viewed as ambition. Any misstep could be framed as treachery. The burden of serving under a paranoid ruler was immense, forcing men to balance their duties with the constant threat of being accused of disloyalty. In this climate, simple disagreements over strategy or policy could spiral into deadly confrontations. Over time, paranoia hardened into the defining character of imperial leadership. It shaped laws, influenced alliances, and determined which stories were recorded for future generations. The empire marched forward not on stability, but on the fragile conviction that danger was always near, and that a ruler's survival depended on eliminating threats before they materialized. Yet, beneath this constant tension, a deeper truth simmered. The more ruthlessly emperors tried to silence their fears, the more violently those fears eventually resurfaced. Public executions in Rome were far more than punishment. They were carefully staged political performances designed to send a message that words alone could never deliver. When an emperor chose to eliminate a rival publicly, the act was meant to echo across the empire with the force of a thunderclap. Crowds gathered not simply to witness justice, but to internalize a warning. Defiance had a price, and the emperor was willing to make anyone pay it. In these moments, power was not discussed or debated, it was displayed in overwhelming, undeniable form. The architecture of these spectacles was precise. Every detail reinforced the idea that imperial authority was absolute. The condemned were often brought out in chains, surrounded by guards chosen for their imposing presence. The emperor did not need to speak. His silence carried a weight that made even the bravest men tremble. By the time the executioner raised his instrument, the public had already absorbed the intended lesson. In Rome, the survival of one man at the top mattered more than the fate of dozens who challenged him. But the real brilliance of these spectacles was not in the violence itself, but in how the emperors used them to manipulate perception. A rival executed publicly became, in the eyes of the people, not a political opponent, but an enemy of the state. Executions were framed as acts of protection, of cleansing, as necessary measures to preserve order. And once the narrative took hold, the emperor's role shifted from aggressor to guardian, transforming brutal acts into symbols of stability. This psychological sleight of hand allowed rulers to eliminate threats while maintaining an image of heroic authority. These events also served another purpose. They exposed the fragile hierarchy beneath Rome's polished surface. Senators, watched from VIP vantage points, forced to witness what might happen to them if their loyalty wavered. Military leaders and administrators took careful note of who trembled, who applauded, and who looked away. Every reaction was catalogued, every expression interpreted. Public executions became a barometer of political climate, revealing hidden alliances and unspoken fears. Sometimes the brutality escalated beyond simple beheadings or hangings. Rivals accused of treason were subjected to punishments crafted to humiliate as well as destroy. Their wealth was seized, their names erased from public records, and their families disgraced. An execution did not end a life, it ended a legacy. And in Rome, where reputation was currency, the destruction of a man's memory was often more terrifying than the loss of his breath. Crowds played their role too, though not always willingly. Public reactions could determine the emperor's next move. A hesitant cheer might suggest discontent. A roaring approval could be manipulated into propaganda. The emperor understood that fear alone was not enough. Fear had to be witnessed to be effective. And so these executions became rituals of intimidation, reinforcing a cycle in which violence justified authority, and authority demanded more violence. Yet beneath all the ceremony, a darker truth lingered. The very need for such theatrical punishments revealed the fragility of imperial rule. If an emperor were truly secure, he would not need to parade his enemies before the masses. The stage, the crowds, the blood, all of it hinted at a deeper instability, one that grew with every new execution ordered in the name of self-preservation. And as Rome watched these displays unfold, it also absorbed the growing tension that pulsed beneath the empire's glamorous exterior, a tension that would soon erupt in ways no ruler could completely control. If this glimpse into the brutal spectacle of Roman executions made you reflect on how power shapes public perception, leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Tell me what struck you the most, or what detail lingered in your mind as these scenes unfolded. Your perspective adds depth to this exploration, and I would like to hear how this part of Rome's dark history resonated with you. Beyond public executions, Roman emperors perfected subtler forms of eliminating rivals, ones that left little evidence and no immediate spectacle. Poison became a favored instrument, employed not out of haste, but out of precision and psychological calculation. A carefully administered dose could silence a senator, general, or even a family member without raising alarm. The victim might appear ill for weeks or months, providing ample time for the emperor to observe reactions, gauge loyalty among the court, and manipulate public perception. The invisible hand of death was often more effective than the sword, for it instilled a lingering fear. No one could trust the air they breathed, the wine they drank, or even the words spoken by those closest to them. These secretive killings required layers of planning and deception. Trusted servants were coerced or bribed to administer the poison, often under the guise of medicine, supplements, or even religious rituals. Physicians, too, became instruments of control, their knowledge twisted to serve political ends. A misdiagnosis, a delayed treatment, a subtle alteration in a recipe, all could seal a rival's fate. Yet the true genius of these methods lay not merely in eliminating individuals, but in amplifying uncertainty. Every illness, every sudden death became a puzzle. Was it nature, misfortune, or the emperor's will? In a society where rumor traveled faster than justice, ambiguity alone could devastate an entire network of potential challengers. Exile represented another cruelly effective strategy. Men and women who could not be eliminated outright were sent to distant provinces or remote territories, often under the pretense of service or governance. What seemed like a promotion or assignment was frequently a calculated method to strip influence, isolate alliances, and destroy reputations. Exiles endured harsh climates, minimal resources, and social isolation, while their positions of power evaporated. Letters from Rome, censored and delayed, ensured that the emperor's control extended even across miles. leaving the exile dependent on scraps of information and the capricious goodwill of local authorities. By the time a rival returned, if they ever did, their political base had crumbled, their memory in the capital faded, and their potential for vengeance diminished. Manipulation of accusations and confessions formed yet another layer of this political machinery. Emperors exploited fear and coercion to extract admissions of wrongdoing that were often fabricated or exaggerated. These confessions could justify imprisonment, confiscation of property, or execution, providing the appearance of legality while masking the true intent. The systematic removal of threats, torture, psychological pressure, and isolation coerced compliance, and once the accused admitted guilt, even falsely, the state recorded the act as legitimate. The power of law, in this context, became a weapon not of justice, but of calculated oppression, ensuring the emperor remained untouchable while rivals were neutralized. Families were not spared. Relatives of perceived traitors could be seized, fined, or forced into exile, extending punishment beyond the individual and warning potential challengers that rebellion carried a collective cost. This intergenerational strategy reinforced the emperor's dominance while undermining social cohesion. Political opponents learned that power extended beyond personal ambition, and that every connection, every lineage could be weaponized or destroyed. It was a methodical dismantling of influence that ensured the emperor's authority was rarely contested directly. These strategies, executed with meticulous planning and ruthless efficiency, reinforced the psychological grip of the imperial office. Eliminations through poison, exile, and coerced confessions cultivated a culture of uncertainty and submission, demonstrating that survival depended less on loyalty and more on invisibility. The empire's machinery of control extended beyond armies and public displays. It reached into the private lives of senators, generals, and families, rendering the most powerful, men and women, vulnerable to unseen forces. In this environment, the true mastery of Roman emperors was not just in defeating enemies openly, but in creating a pervasive system of fear that left everyone wondering who would be next. Exile, however, was more than just a removal from the center of power. It was a slow, deliberate method of eroding a rival's very identity. The distance from Rome severed ties to allies, diminished social influence, and replaced familiarity with disorientation. Once a man or woman arrived in a remote province, they faced isolation, unfamiliar customs, harsh conditions, and the relentless uncertainty of imperial oversight. Letters and messengers, tightly controlled by governors loyal to the emperor, delivered fragmented updates, ensuring that the exiled felt both distant and powerless. Over time, their networks of influence decayed, and their ability to manipulate politics at court evaporated. This was psychological warfare in its purest form. To make someone disappear not with death, but with invisibility, erasing their presence from the conscious memory of the capital while they lived on in silent despair. The most ingenious emperors combined exile with manipulation of public perception. Official records portrayed these removals as honorable appointments, promotions, or necessary administrative assignments. The population, unaware of the hidden cruelty, witnessed the facade and often assumed the emperor acted for the good of the state. Meanwhile, the exiled were left to struggle, deprived of power, influence, and support, often forced to rely on strangers and subordinates whose loyalty was dictated by fear or imperial favor. Even the act of survival became a political calculation, to navigate unfamiliar territory while maintaining enough credibility to avoid complete annihilation. Coordinating exile with poison or forced confessions created a network of interlocking threats. Rivals who might have survived one method of removal were further neutralized by layered strategies, A general sent to a frontier province might also face sabotage, starvation, or the clandestine administration of a lethal substance. A senator exiled to a distant city might discover that allies were removed, letters intercepted, and support undermined, leaving them vulnerable to accusations fabricated by loyal informants. The genius of this system was in its subtlety. Those targeted rarely understood why their influence diminished so completely. Yet the effect was unmistakable. Power was not only concentrated at the center, but psychologically enforced across the empire. Exile also served as a warning to those who remained in Rome. Citizens, senators, and military leaders observed these departures and interpreted them as reminders that disloyalty or ambition could be punished without spectacle, without bloodshed in the forum, but with consequences just as permanent. The slow, controlled nature of exile amplified fear because it allowed imagination to fill the gaps. The uncertainty of what awaited the exiled created tension that extended far beyond those directly targeted, touching families, allies, and associates, subtly reshaping the behavior of anyone with influence or visibility. Furthermore, exile exploited human pride and reputation. Men and women accustomed to the respect and status of Rome were humiliated when forced into obscurity. Their titles, honors, and connections became meaningless, leaving them vulnerable to manipulation by local governors who owed allegiance to the emperor. Every step of their journey reinforced the lesson that survival depended on invisibility, compliance, and the emperor's favor. Political relevance could vanish overnight, replaced by fear, uncertainty, and the slow, methodical erosion of identity. In this environment, loyalty was no longer just expected. It became a currency, constantly tested and often punished, regardless of sincerity. Emperors understood that absolute control required not only eliminating threats, but also shaping perception, ensuring that power was feared and respected simultaneously. Exile, in its precision and cruelty, demonstrated the mastery of Rome's rulers. A tool that killed ambition without spilling immediate blood, destroying influence without public spectacle, and ensuring the emperor's supremacy was unchallenged, even when rivals remained alive. The empire thrived not solely on armies and laws, but on the careful orchestration of absence, silence, and the psychological dismantling of those who might oppose it. Some emperors went further than exile, executions, or poison. They created enemies that existed only in the mind, carefully constructed threats designed to justify cruelty before a single act of rebellion could occur. These were rivals who often did not exist, opponents fabricated by paranoia and strategy, whose presence demanded preemptive action. Accusations were whispered into the ears of the emperor by advisors who understood that fear was a tool more effective than loyalty. A single letter, a half-remembered conversation, or even a glance could be twisted into evidence of conspiracy. Once an individual was marked, their fate was sealed. Torture, forced confessions, and public shaming became instruments to validate the emperor's suspicions, creating a cycle in which imagined dangers could be eliminated with the same precision as real ones. The psychological impact of this practice was profound. Senators and generals learned that not only their actions, but their thoughts could be monitored and interpreted as treachery. Every word, every gesture, every alliance was scrutinized. Loyalty became performance. Private relationships were weaponized, and silence was no longer protection, but suspicion. Those accused of fabricated crimes were subjected to interrogation methods designed to break not only the body, but the mind. Sleep deprivation, isolation, and exposure to fear were common. The emperor's goal was to extract a confession that confirmed his narrative, reinforcing his absolute authority and demonstrating that resistance, even imagined, was futile. These methods created an environment of constant tension, where the line between reality and fabrication blurred. Individuals who were entirely loyal could be accused of treason and forced to endure the same punishments as actual conspirators. Friends became spies, alliances turned fragile, and every interaction carried the potential for deadly consequences. The emperor's power extended beyond armies or laws. It infiltrated minds, bending perception and eroding the sense of security that had once defined political life in Rome. In some cases, this strategy involved entire families, spreading fear across generations. The knowledge that a relative could be punished for imagined crimes instilled obedience far more effectively than any open threat. Children learned early that disobedience, or even the wrong association, could bring ruin. Parents were forced to monitor not only their own behavior, but that of their children, ensuring that the emperor's influence reached into private life with precision and permanence. It was a system where psychological control maintained dominance, even in the absence of visible action. The creation of non-existent enemies also served a public purpose. By demonstrating that the emperor could act decisively against threats, real or imagined, he reinforced the perception of invincibility. Citizens and subordinates understood that power was absolute and resistance was dangerous. The uncertainty itself became a tool of governance, amplifying fear while minimizing overt violence. When everyone suspected that anyone could be next, compliance became the path of survival. This was not chaos. It was methodical, strategic, and devastatingly effective. Even within the palace, ministers and advisors became pawns in these psychological games, feeding information that might or might not be true, ensuring the emperor remained engaged in a constant process of observation, analysis, and preemptive action. The illusion of omniscience became reality through fear. Those who doubted the system quickly found themselves caught in it, disappearing from records, reappearing in exile, or enduring punishments that left both body and mind fractured. In Rome, the creation of imaginary adversaries became an extension of imperial control, a mechanism that manipulated the psyche of the entire elite class. If this exploration of fabricated threats and psychological manipulation shocked you, leave a comment below sharing what part of this system of imperial control disturbed you the most. Tell me your thoughts about how fear was weaponized and how perception became as deadly as the sword itself. Your perspective adds depth to understanding the extraordinary lengths Roman emperors went to maintain power and control over both real and imagined rivals. Despite the pervasive fear and fabricated enemies, there were occasions when genuine conspiracies emerged, threatening the stability of the empire and forcing emperors to confront real danger. These were rivals who possessed influence, ambition, and the means to challenge imperial authority. Their plots were often sophisticated, involving coordinated efforts among senators, generals, and provincial governors. Unlike the imaginary threats engineered by paranoia, these conspiracies required careful observation, intelligence gathering, and decisive action. An emperor who underestimated such a threat risked not only losing his throne, but triggering chaos that could ripple across the entire empire. The preparation for neutralizing real conspiracies mirrored the techniques used against fabricated ones, but the stakes were immeasurably higher. Spies and informants infiltrated networks of discontent, documenting meetings, intercepting correspondence, and subtly testing loyalties. Every gesture, every whispered plan, every alliance was scrutinized, interpreted through the lens of survival. The emperor's advisors played a crucial role, balancing the need for caution with the urgency of decisive action. Even a single misstep could allow a rival to escape, ignite a rebellion, or undermine the perceived invincibility of the ruler. When conspiracies reached critical stages, emperors acted with a combination of theatrical violence and strategic subtlety. Open displays of force, executions, arrests, and public humiliation served to dismantle the plot while reinforcing imperial authority. Yet, subtler measures, such as exile, confiscation of property, or enforced loyalty oaths, were employed to neutralize remaining threats without provoking further unrest. The goal was not merely to punish conspirators, but to reshape the political landscape so that no similar alliance could form again. In Rome, success was measured not only by survival, but by the eradication of potential threats from the memory and influence of the city. These conspiracies often revealed the fragile balance between loyalty and ambition that defined Roman politics. Generals who had once secured victories for the emperor could quickly become leaders of resistance if they sensed weakness or opportunity. Senators whose voices had been silenced for decades could unite with ambitious newcomers to challenge imperial authority. The very individuals who ensured the empire's stability in times of peace had the knowledge and networks capable of toppling it in times of unrest. Emperors understood that power depended not only on the elimination of immediate threats, but also on the anticipation of future ones, a task that required relentless vigilance and psychological acuity. The aftermath of real conspiracies often extended far beyond the conspirators themselves. Families and associates were punished, loyalists were tested, and provinces were reshaped to prevent the recurrence of rebellion. Public displays of justice reinforced the perception that the emperor's authority was absolute, while behind closed doors, more nuanced strategies were employed to ensure long-term compliance. The combination of fear, intelligence, and preemptive control created a political environment in which survival depended on navigating an ever-shifting web of alliances, loyalties, and potential betrayals. In many cases, these real conspiracies also exposed the limitations of imperial paranoia. Even the most vigilant emperor could be deceived, outmaneuvered, or blindsided by the ingenuity of his rivals. The constant pressure of anticipating threats, combined with the unpredictable nature of human ambition, meant that no emperor could maintain perfect control. And yet, the combination of fear, intelligence, and ruthlessness ensured that most conspiracies were dismantled before they could fully unfold, leaving a legacy of tension, suspicion, and the chilling awareness. That danger could always arise from within the empire itself. The empire's internal turbulence did not end with the resolution of conspiracies. Instead, it evolved into a continuous cycle of vigilance, manipulation, and control. Even those who survived purges, executions, and exiles carried the weight of uncertainty, knowing that their influence, no matter how carefully maintained, could be undermined by shifting alliances or the subtle ambitions of others. Political life in Rome was a perpetual negotiation with danger, where survival demanded acute awareness, tactical patience, and the ability to interpret signals that often meant life or death. The lessons of history were clear. Loyalty was transient, and power could change hands in a single miscalculated step. Military leaders were particularly vulnerable, as their victories often attracted suspicion as much as admiration. Triumphs on the battlefield increased prestige and influence, but they also invited jealousy and fear. An emperor aware of a general's growing popularity might take preemptive steps to diminish that influence, ordering reassignments, introducing rivals to share command, or quietly orchestrating situations where the general's failures could be emphasized. Success was always a double-edged sword. Achievement brought reward, but visibility and acclaim could also signal the need for containment. In Rome, the line between reward and punishment was often indistinguishable. Equally precarious were the careers of senators, whose influence depended on both reputation and perceived loyalty. A single accusation, whether substantiated or not, could result in confiscation of wealth, removal from office, or forced exile. Emperors understood the power of uncertainty. When no one could be certain who was safe, fear became the most reliable tool of governance. Senate sessions, feasts, and public ceremonies were carefully monitored, every expression analyzed, every conversation potentially weaponized. Ordinary interactions became exercises in strategy, where misinterpreted glances or poorly timed words could carry lethal consequences. The interplay between public display and private control was also central to maintaining authority. Executions and punishments served as visible demonstrations of power, reinforcing the perception that the emperor's will was absolute. At the same time, subtle manipulations, secret arrests, forged evidence, or coerced alliances ensured that control extended beyond what the public could see. Rome's elite learned to navigate this duality, balancing outward obedience with private calculation. The psychological strain of maintaining appearances under constant surveillance created a culture where suspicion was not merely a political tool, but a way of life. Over time, the mechanisms of control became self-reinforcing. Advisors who thrived on fear gained influence, informants and spies multiplied, and each preemptive measure validated the necessity of the next. Even when a rival posed no real threat, the emperor's response to perceived danger set a precedent, teaching the court and the military that vigilance and ruthlessness were the highest forms of loyalty. In this environment, the distinction between real and imagined threats blurred, and survival often depended more on perception and compliance than on merit or capability. By the later stages of an emperor's reign, the empire resembled a vast network of psychological contracts. Every member of the elite understood that power was inseparable from fear, and that even small lapses in judgment could trigger a cascade of consequences. Families, friends, and allies were constantly weighed against potential risk, and loyalty was measured not by intent, but by the ability to navigate the treacherous currents of imperial suspicion. The machinery of control became an invisible hand, guiding every action, reinforcing the emperor's supremacy, while leaving a legacy of tension, mistrust, and the constant awareness that even the most secure position could be overturned in an instant. As the empire aged, the shadow of past violence, intrigue, and calculated cruelty lingered long after individual emperors had passed from power. Successors inherited not only a throne, but a culture shaped by centuries of paranoia, manipulation, and preemptive elimination. Political life remained a delicate dance of observation, strategy, and subtle intimidation, where the ghosts of rivals long gone continued to influence decisions and alliances. Even emperors who sought legitimacy through reform or public works found that the habits of control, fear, and psychological dominance were woven into the very fabric of governance. The lessons of history were never forgotten. Power demanded vigilance, ruthlessness, and the understanding that threats could emerge from both seen and unseen corners of the empire. This legacy extended beyond the palace walls. Military commands, provincial administrations, and the Senate itself operated under the weight of precedent. Leaders understood that visibility invited danger, and that influence without careful containment could lead to downfall. Those who navigated this world successfully combined tactical acumen with discretion, learning when to act and when to conceal ambition. The emperor's power was absolute, yet maintained not through law or ideology alone, but through the careful orchestration of fear, loyalty, and perception. Survival depended on a keen sense of observation, the ability to anticipate moves before they occurred, and a willingness to act decisively, even preemptively, to neutralize potential rivals. Families of the elite continued to bear the consequences of these calculated strategies. Children of those who had been exiled, poisoned, or executed learned early that their survival and status depended on conformity, subtlety, and the maintenance of appearances. Alliances were fragile. Trust was measured in cautious increments, and even those who seemed secure could fall victim to sudden accusations. The legacy of Rome's brutal politics created an enduring atmosphere where fear became a tool of governance, shaping behavior across generations and reinforcing the emperor's supremacy long after individual threats were neutralized. Yet within this system of fear, manipulation, and control, the psychological artistry of imperial rule became apparent. The most effective emperors balanced overt displays of power with nuanced, hidden strategies, blending spectacle with subtlety, coercion with suggestion, and punishment with calculation. Every act, public or private, was a message. Loyalty was demanded, influence was monitored, and survival was never guaranteed. The careful integration of visible authority and invisible manipulation ensured that the emperor's presence was felt in every corner of the empire, even where he was absent, reinforcing a hierarchy where obedience and perception were as decisive as military might. Now, having witnessed the intricate web of power, paranoia, and preemptive action that defined Rome's rulers, consider the lessons these events carry for understanding human ambition and authority across time. If you followed this journey into the depths of Roman politics, leave a comment expressing which aspect of this calculated cruelty struck you the most, whether it was the exiles, the fabricated enemies, or the psychological mastery of fear. Make sure you like this video if the exploration revealed new insights, and check that you are subscribed to continue uncovering the hidden layers of history. There is another video waiting just beyond this one that complements these revelations, where more stories of power, betrayal, and survival are waiting to unfold. So continue your journey and explore what comes next in the complex, shadowed world of empires and ambition.